All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Laredo, and my racial analysis is going to be on the school to prison pipeline. I am just going to put on a timer really quick, just so that I know how I'm going with time on this. Yeah, so let's just get started. So I decided to do this one because I thought it was the most interesting. I feel as if most of us can relate to something like this just because we have probably seen it. We've heard people that have gone through this process of school to prison pipeline. Um, but yeah, so let's just begin. This is my first slide that I'm going to go over. Oh, sorry. So my first slide is, what is a school to prison pipeline? So the school to prison pipeline is a nationwide trend in which students are pushed out of schools and into prisons, and they introduce youth to the criminal justice system, which is scary to think about because I don't think anyone wants to go to prison. But it happens, and so this policy, like, it encourages police presence in schools, which is also scary because we don't know what they're gonna do, to what extent they're gonna do things and all that stuff. So a huge contributor to the pipeline that show harsh tactics include physical strength, automatic punishment, that result in suspensions and out of school class time. Next slide. Oops. Who is in the pipeline? So students from two groups are just disproportionately represented in the school to prison pipeline. It's racial minorities and children with disabilities. In this presentation, I'm going to focus more on race rather than the disability aspect, but they kind of go two and two together because of the um how race is implemented in individuals with and without disabilities. So it really shows like how race is a big impact on this certain pipeline. So African American students are 3.5 times more likely than their white classmates to be suspended or expelled, and about 1 in 4 Black children with disabilities are suspended at least once versus 1 in 11 white students. So you can kind of see how race is in there because 1 in 4 Black children with disabilities are suspended, but only 1 in 11 white students are suspended. So that's where you can kind of see the difference. And also they're punished way more than white students and Latino students. So in this picture, I added kind of like a number range and like kind of a more of a visual to see um what all these factors lay into play. So over 57,000 people under the age of 21 are into juvenile detention centers. That was crazy to me when I looked it up. I was not thinking that that was a thing, but it is. And 95% of school suspensions are for minor infractions, my bad. But I'll get more into that later. But it also says that 70% out of school suspensions are African American or Hispanic. So, um, and also 68% of males in prison do not have a high school diploma, which is also was very interesting for me to learn about. Um, and then lastly, one report found that actually 8.6% of public school children um, identified with having disabilities that affect their ability to learn. And these students actually make up 32% of youth in juvenile detention centers. So, wow, a lot of information there. Next slide. And then the next one I'm going to talk about is what factors contribute to the school to prison pipeline. So first one is the zero tolerance policies. So what are they? They're a policy that giving the most severe punishment possible to every person who commits a crime or breaks a rule. But the thing about that is that authority figures are imposed to predetermined punishment, regardless of circumstances or history. And also, what do these policies lead to? These policies lead to frequent seclusion, suspension, and expulsion of students with color with disabilities. And this negatively impacts the students that need supports and services offered in an IEP. So that's a big factor. And school police have disproportionately deployed in schools with high percentages of youth of color. And also school research, resource officers and school police have been linked to discipline practices and inappropriate restraints and the arrest of students of color with disabilities due to fact of the racial profiling. And they have the tendency to label students of color as aggressive, intimidating, and threatening. And also another factor is the social emotional learning, which can be stressful for students of color with disabilities due to the fact that there's a lot of stigmas associated with race and disability. And what happens if these students don't get the social emotional learning they need? These students find it harder to manage their feelings, which means more outbursts, meltdowns, avoidance, and disengagement. And these zero tolerance policies and school police severely punish students of color for behaviors they may have associated with their disability. So this further advances the student school to prison pipeline, but it's horrible. It's a lot. But next slide. So next, I'm going to be talking about the institutions and authority figures that criminalize students. In this slide, I use the labeling theory. The labeling theory is the contend that people come to identify and behave in ways that reflect how others label them. And how is a labeling theory applied to school prison pipeline? So being labeled as a bad kid by school authorities and being treated in a way that reflects the label can lead to kids internalizing it and then behaving in the ways that make it real. And in the social aspect of Black and Latino students, social institutions label deviant youth as bad or criminal, which stripe them of their dignity, fail to acknowledge their struggles, and do not treat them with respect. So next, I'm going to talk about Black students and how they face harsher punishments and higher rates of suspension and expulsion. So schools with large Black populations and underfunded schools are most likely to employ zero tolerance policies. And while the percent of white students suspended fall from 1999 to 2007, the percentage of Black and Hispanic students suspended rose. And the disparity of this is greatest among non-serious offenses like cell phone use, violations of dress code, and being disrupted or displaying affection. And so Black first-time offenders in these categories are suspended double and more than white first-time offenders. And also, among the students of color, more than 1 out of the 4 boys of color with disabilities, and nearly 1 in 5 of color with girls of color with disabilities received an out-of-school suspension. So white students who express behavioral issues in schools are more likely to be treated with medicine, which reduces their chances of ending up in jail or prison. after acting out. And so school-related arrests show that the racial disparity in incarceration begins with the school to prison pipeline. And also, not only do they deal with harsher punishments, but they also deal with more school-related arrests and removal from the school system. So given that racial bias with education is well documented, there's no surprise that Black and Latinx students comprise 70% of those who face federal to law enforcement or school-related arrests. And this comment right here, it says students that are labeled as juvenile delinquents and attend alternative schools offer lower quality education that they would receive in public schools. And also the school to prison pipeline, it shows that it's fueled by racial bias and produces racist outcomes that really cause harm to families and the lives and communities of people of color. And once these students are in contact with the criminal justice system, they're far less likely to complete high school. And a lot of these students that are placed in juvenile detention centers or prison may receive no education resources at all. So that's really crazy to think about in the factor of not having the education that you deserve over your race and being looked at as a person of color and not getting the same education as everyone else and being just seen as, oh my gosh, you're a person of color, so I'm just gonna assume that you're doing something bad, and then that makes them go to prison. So it's not fair. But I'm gonna show you a video next about a better look at the whole idea. It shows footage as well from this pipeline. So let me just oh, never mind. I have more. My bad. 2 more slides and then I have the video. So how do the prison to school pipeline be dismantled? What I believe from my research is that not hiring so many school resource officers is the main problem. Not main problem, but like thing that we should implement, because due to like a lot of school resource officers, children are more likely to be arrested at school, and they criminalize a lot of students of color. So not taking a lot of these officers away, just not having so many in an area that's not needed. And so I added, so the number of officers rose 38% from 1997 to 2007. So that's a lot. And another thing that we can do is provide support for teachers for effective discipline, just by providing ways that we can help as educators, and restoring justice practices, which can be medication, conflict resolution, and hiring more counselors for emotional support to prevent negative behavior. And lastly, before the video, I have avoiding the pipeline. I'm trying to move myself. Hold on. How can school districts divert the school to prison pipeline? So I have a few here. One is to increase the use of positive behavior interventions and supports. Compile annual reports on the total number of disciplinary actions that push students out of the classroom based on gender, race, and ability. Create agreements with police departments and court systems to limit arrests at the school and use of restraints such as mace and handcuffs. Provide simple explanation of infractions and prescribed responses in the student code of conduct to ensure fairness, and to create appropriate limits on the use of law enforcement in public schools, and to train teachers on the use of positive behavior supports at-risk students. Okay, so my timer says 14:41 right now. So I'll probably show only 1 minute-ish of the video. But I thought it was important to add, so here we go. I'm just gonna click on it really quickly.
There's this phrase that you might hear in the news sometimes, the school to prison pipeline. It's shorthand for how schools are funneling students, especially Black students, into the criminal justice system. It started in the 90s when schools responded to fears about crime with zero tolerance policies, which mandated suspensions and expulsions for certain violations. They also cracked down on little things like talking back or uniform violations. The hope was that it would keep bigger problems from bubbling up. But as a result, out of school suspensions have doubled since the 1970s, and they keep increasing, even though juvenile crime rates have now been dropping for years. Around the same time, the number of police officers stationed full time inside schools has increased by a third between 1997 and 2007. Ostensibly, they were there to prevent mass school shootings like the one at Columbine, but they end up being a way for schools to basically outsource discipline to the police. Schools with officers have 5 times as many arrests for disorderly conduct as schools without them. Sometimes the results are shocking. But the less visible effect is that schools are feeding the racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Consider the fact that schools are more likely to have an officer on their campus if the student population is more than 50% Black. You might assume that that's because there's more crime at these schools, but although students at police schools are more likely to be arrested, they're not actually more likely to be charged in court for weapons, drugs, alcohol, or assault, at least according to one study. During the 2010-2011 school year, 1 in 6 public school students in the US were Black, but they accounted for 1 in 3 arrests at school. Same goes for other forms of school discipline. Black students are suspended or expelled 3 times more frequently than white students. It actually begins in preschool. 18% of preschoolers are Black. But if all preschoolers suspended more than once, 48% are Black. Studies show that differences in behavior can't fully account for these disparities. Black students and white students are sent to the principal's office at similar rates, but Black students are more likely to end up with a serious punishment. One study.
Okay, so that was my video. Obviously, if you would like to watch the whole thing, there's only like a minute left. Totally go for it. There's a lot of information in that. But lastly,
there's this phrase that
lastly, I just have my works cited. Thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope everyone has a good break.